Namaskar, this is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. Tonight we start with Japan. It is under attack. First, the Chinese state called it selfish. Then the Chinese media went after Tokyo, and now Chinese trolls have gone wild, both online and offline. People in Japan are getting threatening phone calls. Japanese citizens and school children in China are being targeted. All this over the Fukushima water release. We'll show you some videos and pictures that tell you the full story. Meanwhile, in Taiwan, Foxconn's founder wants to run for president. Does he stand a chance? What's his view on China? We'll discuss. India has imposed more tax on rice exports. We'll decode the trend for you. In Niger, the French embassy is being besieged. The junta has asked the ambassador to leave. In France, they're spending millions of dollars to destroy wine. We'll tell you why. In the UK, Rishi Sunak is coming under fire for pursuing a trade deal with India. In Pakistan, more confusion over Nawaz Sharif's return, and Niraj Chopra makes history again. We'll bring you his spectacular story. The headlines first. Syria's Aleppo airport closed after Israeli airstrikes. Syria claims its runway has been damaged. In the month of March, Israeli attacks put the same airport out of service twice. These strikes in Syria primarily target Iran-backed forces and Lebanon's Hezbollah fighters. The US and China will set up a new working group to discuss trade tensions. The agreement was reached during the latest high-level trip to Beijing by US officials. This group will meet twice annually. The world's largest economy is looking to ease tensions with its strategic competitor. Trouble continues for Chinese property giant Evergrande. Its shares plunged by over 80% in Hong Kong. It was their first day of trading after a 17-month suspension. Evergrande was once China's largest real estate firm. It now has over $300 billion in liabilities. Japan postpones its lunar mission launch for the third time. The Moon Sniper mission was called off just 30 minutes before launch. Tokyo blamed heavy winds for this. No new date has been set for the next attempt. This comes just days after India successfully completed its moon mission. France will ban children from wearing the abaya in state-run schools. The abaya is a long, baggy garment worn by Muslim girls and women. In 2004, France banned headscarves in schools. Large crosses and Jewish kippas are also prohibited in French public schools. The mother of Spanish football president is on hunger strike. She says it is to protest the inhuman treatment of Luis Rubiales. She has locked herself inside a church. FIFA has suspended Rubiales, but he has refused to resign over kissing a Spanish footballer on her lips. And Simone Biles wins a record 8th title at the US Gymnastics Championships. With this, she has broken a 90-year-old record. The 26-year-old is now the oldest woman to ever win the championships. The 7-time Olympic medalist returned to competition less than a month ago after a 2-year break. The Chinese are furious. Last week, Japan started releasing the water from Fukushima. Beijing says Tokyo has unleashed Godzilla. Not making this up, you have to watch this to believe it.
With the rise of nuclear mushroom clouds woke up Godzilla. It is Japan's collective trauma of nuclear destruction. That is why the world was stunned when the traumatized country decided to dispose the nuclear-contaminated water of Fukushima into the sea. How will it impact on food safety, on neighboring countries, and on the marine environment? What will it bring to our descendants? Japan is ready to make its own nuclear trauma a global nightmare.
This is from a Chinese mouthpiece. China is getting creative with its propaganda online, but in the real world, Japanese citizens are being harassed. They're being threatened and abused on the phone. Japanese schools in China are being targeted. Stones and eggs have been thrown at their windows. Clearly, tensions are on the rise. It started last Thursday. That's when Japan started releasing radioactive water into the Pacific. We've been telling you about this, about the Fukushima nuclear power plant. It was wrecked by a tsunami in the year 2011. Huge waves of water flooded the nuclear plant. Nuclear fuel leaked into this water. The radioactive reactors shut down. More water was used to cool them down. This water became contaminated. It became radioactive. It was stored in tanks for all these years, since 2011. But now Tokyo is running out of storage space. We're talking about large quantities of water here, more than 1 million tons. More than enough to fill 500 Olympic swimming pools. This water was stored in more than 1,000 tanks. Japan decided to treat it, to remove all radioactive elements and dump the water into the ocean. The treated water still has some amount of tritium, which is a radioactive substance, but Japan says it's safe. Experts from the United Nations also say it's safe. Not everyone is convinced though, especially China. Irrespective, Japan began releasing the water into the ocean last week and China threw a fit. First, it went to the United Nations to protest.
China and other stakeholders have repeatedly pointed out that if nuclear contaminated water is safe, then there is no need to discharge it into the sea. If it is not safe, it should not be discharged.
China did not get the support it hoped for. The UN maintains the water is fit for release, so Beijing adopted a different strategy. It targeted Japan directly. First, China inflicted economic damage. It imposed a sweeping ban on Japanese seafood. China says Japanese seafood could be contaminated. There is no scientific basis to this claim. But Chinese mouthpieces are amplifying it anyway. They're running scathing editorials. They're publishing provocative posts, like that Godzilla video we just showed you. And this one, a cartoon from the Global Times. Japan does not find it funny, of course. Chinese social media is boosting Beijing's accusations. They're making more unsubstantiated claims, like this one. Apparently, these are Chinese fish sellers, and they're really upset. Pretty dramatic. What are they so angry about? They're complaining about Japan's move. They think their fish is contaminated. Again, none of this is backed by science or any credible explanation for that matter. Experts say such fears are irrational, but China is adding fuel to this fire. Their verbal attacks have taken an ugly turn. People in Japan are receiving threatening phone calls. These calls come from Chinese numbers. And who is the target of this phone campaign? There's a long list: local businesses, schools, government departments, and in one case, even an aquarium. The callers speak in Mandarin, Japanese, and English. In many cases, they abuse the person on the other side. There have been so many phone calls that the businesses say they're struggling to operate. Finally, Tokyo has escalated the matter. It summoned the Chinese ambassador, but the harassment continues. Japanese establishments in China are also getting threatening phone calls. Today, Tokyo made its complaints public. It demanded action from Beijing.
A lot of harassment phone calls regarding the Fukushima water release, believed to be originating from China, are occurring in Japan. Many similar cases are occurring at related facilities in China. These developments are extremely regrettable and we are concerned.
They have good reason to be worried because in some cases, this protest has turned violent. Japan had to warn its citizens in China. They have been advised to avoid speaking Japanese loudly and to stay away from any Fukushima-related demonstrations. There is a travel advisory too. If you're Japanese and you're visiting China, Tokyo wants you to leave your contact numbers and itinerary with family, friends and employers at home. Japan is worried about the security of its people and not without reason. Like we told you, Japanese schools in China have been targeted. Stones were hurled at a school in Qingdao. Last week, eggs were thrown at another school in the Suzhou city. These are legitimate security concerns. And what is China's response to Japan? More lectures.
The first thing I would like to tell you is that China has always safeguarded the safety and legitimate rights and interests of foreigners in China in accordance with the law. I would also like to stress that the government of Japan has unilaterally and forcibly initiated the discharge of contaminated water from the Fukushima nuclear accident, in defiance of the strong doubts and objections of the international community. Neighboring countries and the international community have been generally critical of this self-serving and highly responsible behavior by the government of Japan and have taken preventive measures accordingly.
He barely said anything about the security of Japanese nationals. Instead, China keeps complaining about Fukushima. But these allegations reek of hypocrisy, and I'll tell you why I say this. Chinese nuclear plants do the very same thing. They dumped wastewater into the ocean. In fact, China has released 6.5 times more wastewater than what Japan plans to. So what is the fuss all about? It's not about science or safety. This is about politics. China wants to settle scores with Japan for its support to Taiwan, for the drills in South China Sea, and for its alliance with the US. China's ultimate goal is to build pressure on Japan to influence policy changes, to make Tokyo bend to its will. It may not happen. And China's tactics are a nuisance in the best case scenario. In the worst, they could lead to dangerous outcomes. In Taiwan, it's election season, possibly their most important one in recent times. Just look at the backdrop. More tensions, more military drills, and more Chinese incursions. So the next president will have to be ready, not just for domestic issues, but also for the growing threat from China. Which brings us to the newest candidate, Terry Gou. He's the founder of Foxconn Technology. The name should be familiar. Foxconn is the biggest maker of electronic components. Their top client is Apple. They make iPhones and iPads across the world. In fact, around 70% of all iPhones are made by Foxconn. And this man founded the company. He ran it for close to 45 years. But in 2019, he stepped down from day-to-day management. His current net worth is around $7.4 billion, which makes him the 6th richest person in Taiwan. Now back to his candidacy. Terry Gou announced his bid on Sunday. He is planning to run as an independent candidate. So no political party, he's running alone. Now for any Taiwanese politician, China is an important question. It's not just about policy, it is an existential question. China considers Taiwan to be a long-lost province and Xi Jinping wants it back. He hasn't ruled out a military invasion to do so. But Taiwan rejects this claim. They like their independence and their freedoms. So what does China, or what does Gou make of China in fact? He says he will not let Taiwan become the next Ukraine. This is what he said.
Taiwan must not become Ukraine, and I will not let Taiwan become the next Ukraine. I implore the Taiwanese people to give me 4 years. I promise that I will bring 50 years of peace to the Taiwan Strait.
Basically, no war. That's his promise. We'll see how serious he is. But first, some background on Taiwan's politics. The current president is Tsai Ing-wen. She leads a party called the DPP, the Democratic Progressive Party. Now, President Tsai is on her second term, so legally she cannot contest again. The main opposition party is called the Kuomintang. They ruled mainland China for more than 2 decades, but in 1949 they fled to Taiwan. They were defeated by the Communist Party. Both the DPP, the ruling party, and the Kuomintang oppose China's claims. They reject reunification with China. They want to remain independent. But there's a key difference. The Kuomintang prefers talks and appeasement. They say if China is a friend, they will not invade. So build closer ties with Beijing. Well, good luck with that. President Tsai and her party, the DPP, are more muscular. Under them, Taiwan has moved closer to the west. So which camp does Terry Gou belong to? In 2019, he did try to win the Kuomintang's nomination for president. He couldn't, so he dropped out. This year, he tried again, but the Kuomintang rejected him once more. They chose the mayor of New Taipei City. So more failure, except this time, he's not giving up. Instead of dropping out, he's contesting as an independent. Terry Gou must secure around 300,000 signatures. If he does so by the 2nd of November, he can contest. So what are his chances? Well, not very good at the moment. He is the fourth candidate for president. The other three are former or serving mayors. They are popular, they are political veterans, and they are backed by established parties. So Terry Gu's chances are slim. The front runner is this man, William Lai. He is the DPP's candidate for president. He is currently serving as Tsai Ing-wen's deputy. If he wins, it could be a seamless transition. We'll know that by January next year. But for now, back to Terry Gu. What kind of president would he be? He still owns around 12% shares in Foxconn. That's where he gets his money from. And where does Foxconn get its money? From China. Around 70% of the company's revenue is from the mainland. They have dozens of factories there, including the biggest iPhone factory with 100,000 workers. It's a clear conflict of interest. Terry Gu's fortune is linked to China. If China is not happy, they can turn the screws on Foxconn. And what does Terry Gu think of that? He says he will sacrifice his personal assets to prevent war.
If I can prevent China from attacking Taiwan by sacrificing my personal assets, I am willing to become a worker in a molds factory. If then they won't attack Taiwan. But I will not follow their orders or instructions.
Two problems with that. One, easier said than done. And two, they're really not his assets, are they? Just put yourself in Xi Jinping's shoes. You have the chance to create history, to do what Mao Zedong could not do, to invade and reunify Taiwan. Would you pick that or a gadget manufacturing company? I think the answer is clear. You can't bribe China with Foxconn assets. Only military and political deterrence will work, which is why this election is so very important. Stability in the Taiwan Strait is key for the whole world. And this election could determine what that stability looks like. One based on balance of power or one based on appeasement. Here in India, the government has announced a major decision. Export of parboiled rice will carry a 20% tax, 20% export duty. It's a very consequential decision, but I must say, not a surprising one. Rice prices have reached a 12-year high. Export of most varieties is already curbed. Plus, there are state elections around the corner. So it wasn't a question of if, it was a question of when the duty would be announced. Now, just to be clear, this export curb is not about shortages. There is no rice shortage in India, so don't rush to your grocery store. This export curb is about regulating supply. If you increase export duty, the product becomes more expensive abroad. And when that happens, fewer people buy it abroad. So the idea is to reduce exports and increase domestic supply. Hopefully that will cool down prices. But this decision goes beyond India. It may help reduce prices in our country, but elsewhere, it could trigger a food crisis. And I'm talking about actual shortages now, not inflation, shortages. Let me explain how. India makes up around 40% of total rice exports, 40, the biggest exporter in the world. Parboiled rice is a big part of this basket. Now, what does parboiled mean? This is a variety of rice that is partially pre-cooked. It is boiled in the husk and then dried, hence parboiled. Poorer countries in Africa and Asia depend on this kind of rice because A, it's cheaper, and B, it's rich in fiber and proteins. Other countries also produce this variety, like Pakistan and Thailand. But their exports are more expensive than India's, hence the duty. Traders say this decision will level out the prices. So parboiled rice from India may cost the same as parboiled rice from Thailand or Pakistan. But how would that trigger a crisis? Because it's not just parboiled rice, it's all kinds of rice. India has now imposed export curbs on every variety of rice. Let me show you. First is basmati, the premium variety. India has set a minimum export price for basmati. The shipments must cost at least $1,200 per ton. If not, you cannot export basmati from India. And basmati makes up around 20% of India's exports. The second is parboiled rice. As we mentioned, there's a 20% duty. This variety makes up around 30% of India's exports. The third is non-basmati white rice. Now, this variety has been completely banned, zero exports. It used to make up around 30% of India's rice shipments. And finally, we have broken rice. Again, zero exports. The government imposed a total ban last year. This variety made up 20% of total shipments. So just to recap, around half of India's rice shipments have been banned, the remaining half have restrictions. Things like minimum price and duties. So naturally the world is worried. And it's not just rice. India has curbed the export of multiple food products in the recent past. Wheat was banned last year, wheat export. Onion has a 40% export duty. And reports say sugar could be next. The government is expected to announce the decision soon. It would be India's first sugar export curb in 7 years. So what explains all these bans and duties? In one word, it's inflation. India's food inflation is in double digits. It was 11.5% in the month of July. That's the highest level in 3 years. And driven by food prices, overall inflation has shot up. It was 7.44% in July. To give you some context, the Reserve Bank of India's tolerance band is 2 to 6%. Ideally, it should be around 4%. 4% inflation is good. How do you achieve that? The RBI can always hike interest rates to bring down inflation, but there's a downside to that. Economic growth will be affected. So far, the RBI has resisted that. Earlier this month, they chose to keep the rates unchanged. The RBI governor explained why. He's playing a waiting game, basically. He's expecting vegetable prices to cool down by September. But what if they don't? What if prices rise despite these export curbs? That is the big risk for India. In fact, it's the risk for all countries. Balancing between rate hikes and growth. That's the tightrope all countries are walking. India is projected to be the fastest growing major economy in 2023. Big players like China are struggling. So now is the time to capitalize. But to do that, inflation must be brought under control. Of course, this is the worst case scenario. In the best case scenario, harvest will be good, the supply will return to normal and prices will cool down. Who knows, maybe even the export curbs will be lifted. But even in this best case scenario, there is a problem. The problem of credibility. When you export 40% of any product, you also have a responsibility. And when it's food, even more so. Such sudden bans and duties will raise questions on India's credibility and its ability to feed the world. And I'm not saying we should sacrifice the domestic market to feed the world. I'm saying we will have to be better prepared. The difference between stable inflation and double-digit inflation cannot be one monsoon, especially when the world's food security depends on it. And now let's turn our attention to West Africa. It's been over a month since the coup in Niger and supporters of the junta are celebrating. They see the coup as a new dawn, a second independence from France, as it were. Niger's military junta are fueling this narrative. They've blamed France for all the problems in their country. And now they're issuing ultimatums. On Friday, the French ambassador was told to leave the country. He was given 48 hours to do so. Last we checked, he was still in Niger and planned to stay. Some reports said the US and German ambassadors were also asked to go, but those have now been refuted. It seems for now, only the old colonizer France has drawn the junta's ire. On Saturday, Niger's junta held a rally in the capital, Niamey. About 20,000 people attended this demonstration, and the junta played to the crowd.
The French have been asked to leave, but they refused. We are going to defeat those plotting against our country. We are going to defeat them and stomp them out. They are asking you to get ready. You mustn't sleep or doze off. They will leave.
The junta is mobilizing volunteer fighters. Thousands have reportedly joined. The idea is to put pressure on the French to leave.
We told them to leave our country to us, to leave to let our country be. But it's you who will chase them away. To chase them away, don't go to the embassy. If the mobilization continues, they will leave.
The crowd responded enthusiastically. They agree with the call to expel the French.
It has been 30 days. We are totally satisfied with the actions they have taken, the agreements they have denounced, and the decisions they have taken, including the immediate departure of the French and the French embassy from Niger.
On les a accompagnés depuis le début jusqu'à aujourd'hui. L'ambassadeur de France.
We don't need any lessons from the French ambassador. We don't even have any consideration for these people. Why did they leave Burkina? Why did they leave Mali? So even Niger, they're going to leave Niger as soon as Niger doesn't belong to them. So they're going to leave, it's an obligation. We're asking the agency on Monday morning to cut off the electricity at the French embassy and so on, electricity, water and so on. We have nothing to do with the French, they can go home.
At last, coup supporters' plan seems to be in motion. The French ambassador's deadline to leave has passed. He's still in Niamey, like we told you. So water and power supply to the French embassy have reportedly been cut. Food deliveries aren't being allowed either. From the looks of it, the French embassy is being besieged. The junta is trying to smoke the ambassador out. He's not the only target, though. There's also the French military base near the capital. There are 1,500 French troops in Niger. They too have been asked to leave. The troops were there to combat militancy in the region, to fight groups like the Al-Qaeda, ISIS and Boko Haram. But coup supporters in Niger say they do not want help from the French anymore.
We don't want the French here. We don't like them. The French say that Niger is a poor country. But when we tell them to leave, they refuse.
I've come here to demand the departure of French troops from Niger. That's what I've come to demonstrate today. And they have to hear us. I know they can hear us. Every day people come here, people suffer, and all ECOWAS has to do is increase the sanctions. We are here, we're going to resist until death.
ECOWAS is a West African economic bloc. They have been negotiating with the Niger junta, trying to get Mohamed Bazoum reinstated. He is the democratically elected president, Mohamed Bazoum. The West African nations had given an ultimatum. This was just after the coup was announced. They said, reinstate President Bazoum in a week or face military action. Well, 3 weeks have passed since. Bazoum has not been reinstated, and the West African nations have not invaded. Instead, they have imposed sanctions. Nigeria and Benin closed off land borders with Niger. Trade has been brought to a standstill. Niger's food and other supplies are starting to dwindle. It is getting some support from its new allies, though. Who are these new allies? The other coup-hit nations in the region, like Burkina Faso and Mali. They have been sending supplies to Niger. They've also sent troops. And these troops are a deterrence. They're one of the reasons why ECOWAS has not attacked so far. But what happens if the French ambassador or the French base is attacked? France will definitely retaliate, and the ECOWAS forces may have to invade. It puts Niger's junta in a precarious position. This is dangerous brinkmanship. Harming the French ambassador or troops will be asking for escalation. Niger right now is a tinderbox. One wrong move could lead to fighting all over West Africa. Garda, Bled, Lucerne, Annecy. These are 4 of the most popular lakes in Europe. But have you heard of the continent's famous wine lake? Well, this isn't a real lake. Yet during the early 2000s, Europe found itself sinking into it. Europe, you see, is the biggest producer of wine in the world, and around the year 2005, Europe overdid it. They produced 1.7 billion more bottles of wine than they should have. 1.7 billion extra. Basically, supply exceeded demand, prices of wine started collapsing, and this began the curse of the so-called wine lake. It drowned farmers in losses. About 2 decades have passed since, and now a European nation is whining about its wine again. I'm talking about France. It has enough surplus wine to fill 100 Olympic-sized pools. And now the government will spend $216 million to destroy this extra wine. Ruining so much wine sounds bizarre. So why does France want to do it? Our next report tells you.
They say too much of anything is good for nothing, and that probably checks out, especially if we're talking about the French wine market. It's gone from Merlot to Merde. And why is that? Because France has too much wine. If you think this is an ideal champagne problem to have, think again. The European bloc is the biggest producer of wine worldwide, with Italy, France, and Spain leading the charge. France is the world's second largest producer of wine. It makes over 45 million hectoliters of wine each year. But what's the point of making so much wine if people don't want to drink it? Wine consumption has been declining the world over since 2018. Since last year, wine consumption in France has fallen by 15%, following a trend of reductions across Europe, with 7% in Italy, 10% in Spain, 22% in Germany, and 34% in Portugal. Why is the consumption facing a downer? Let's just say there's a cocktail of problems. People's consumption habits are changing. They're more drawn to beer now. Maybe blame the heat waves for that. Secondly, many parts of the world are facing a cost of living crisis. So does Europe. Inflation in EU countries averaged at 9.2% last year. Prices of energy, water, transport, and food are spiking. So when people can't afford basic amenities, wine is the last thing on someone's mind, even if it helps to drown one's sorrows in it. Another big blow came from the pandemic. It shut bars and restaurants worldwide, causing sales to drop. And while demand is taking a nosedive, production costs are increasing. The war in Ukraine disrupted shipments of products essential for winemaking like fertilizers. Climate change is also hampering French wine. Extreme temperatures are changing harvest schedules, so crops are suffering. And this has given France a terrible hangover. Fall in demand for wine has caused overproduction. Prices have fallen sharply, and farmers are going into losses. Among the worst hit is Bordeaux, which is world famous for its wine. But now most of it is sitting around in French cellars. France has enough surplus wine to fill 100 Olympic-sized swimming pools. So what's the solution? France wants to destroy all this wine. It'll cost the country $216 million, but for now, this is the only way to control prices. Most of the money will be used to buy the excess stock, which will be distilled into pure alcohol and used to make sanitizers and perfumes. Some of the money will also go to farmers, so they can switch to other crops like olives. But experts say this idea makes sense only in the short run. The French wine industry needs to take a long, hard look at its consumers and work around their changing consumption patterns. Wine consumption may be dropping, but it's still a strong part of France's identity. After all, French President Macron can't have a meal without it, so his government needs to act fast to make wine relevant again.
What a pity France cannot sell its wines. The UK too is struggling to move its goods. Brexit has limited London's options. So Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is pushing for trade deals. His government is pursuing one with India. It hasn't happened yet. The negotiations are still on. But the proposal has already run into controversy in London. An old ghost has come back to haunt Rishi Sunak. His family links to India's tech powerhouse Infosys. So what is this row about? Visas. They're an important part of any trade deal. The India-UK Free Trade Pact is no different. Visas are a major point of discussion. India wants more visas from the UK, especially for the workers in the information technology or IT sector. That's the ask from New Delhi. If London accepts, then Infosys could be a big beneficiary. It is one of the leading applicants for UK visas. In 2019, the company applied for 2,500 visas. That number will shoot up dramatically if London lifts curbs and makes it easier for Indians to apply. The Labour Party does not like the idea. They're the opposition. They want Rishi Sunak to sit out of the negotiations. Listen to what a Labour MP said, and I'm quoting, "As the Prime Minister recently learned, it's important he declares any interests properly. I expect him to do so in respect of the India trade deal too." And what are these interests? Well, this is not about Rishi Sunak. It's really about his wife, Akshata Murthy. She's the daughter of N.R. Narayan Murthy, the founder of Infosys. Now, Akshata Murthy is a shareholder in Infosys. She owns 0.9% of the company, but she's not an employee of Infosys. Neither does she hold a management title or dictate business decisions. And yet, her links to Infosys keep triggering controversies around the Prime Minister. These questions were raised last year too, in March 2022, after Russia invaded Ukraine. Rishi Sunak took a tough position against the Kremlin. He was the Chancellor of the Exchequer then. the UK's finance minister basically, and he slapped tough sanctions. He even asked British companies to pull out of Russia. A host of them complied. They pulled out of Russia, but the opposition highlighted the case of Infosys. Apparently, it was still operating in Russia, and many British politicians did not like that. It's a bit perplexing, really, but that's politics for you. Infosys is an Indian company. It is subjected to Indian laws, and yet it was being asked to follow British sanctions on Russia. You could blame it on the colonial hangover, but it did blow up into a major issue. Akshata Murthy was accused of collecting what her critics called blood money. That's a reference to the dividend Murthy gets as a shareholder in the company. There was another row over Murthy's non-domicile status. And what is that? It's a special designation, really. If you are a resident of the UK, but you have your permanent home outside the country, you can avoid paying regular British taxes. Akshata Murthy is a citizen of India, so she did not have to pay British taxes. Last year, she decided to pay voluntarily. That's when the issue subsided. But this situation is very different. The trade talks with India have resurrected this story. Infosys does a lot of business in the UK. It has contracts with the British government. It works with companies like Palantir. It's a software company. It works with the UK's healthcare system, the National Health Service or NHS. So you get the idea. Infosys is a well-established brand in the UK, and a trade deal between London and New Delhi could benefit both sides. But it would also put Rishi Sunak under an intense spotlight. So will he sit out of the negotiations? So far, he has no plans to recuse himself. He is expected to visit India soon for the G20 summit. In New Delhi, he is also expected to meet Prime Minister Modi. Reports say a bilateral is being planned. It could happen on the sidelines of G20. The trade deal could also be on the agenda for those talks. London wants to close this deal as soon as possible. Recently, the British Trade Minister was in India. She met top ministers from the Modi cabinet like Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal and Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman. Again, the focus was on trade. So a deal could be on the cards, and it's been a long time in the making. Sunak's predecessor, Boris Johnson, also pursued the same deal. But India's demands for a flexible visa regime derailed the talks. This time, London appears more likely to give in. But what will this compromise cost Rishi Sunak? The British Prime Minister is on thin ice. And now let's move to another case of difficult diplomacy. Israel's first official diplomatic meeting with Libya has turned into a diplomatic debacle. The meeting took place in Italy last week between the Israeli and Libyan foreign ministers. It was a historic first step towards establishing diplomatic ties between these two countries, Israel and Libya. But it seems Israel's foreign minister, Eli Cohen, should have kept quiet about it. On Sunday, he publicized the meeting, and chaos ensued. Protests erupted across Libya. Many Libyans feel the meeting is a betrayal of the Palestinian cause. Libya's prime minister went into damage control mode, and the country's foreign minister has been suspended and then sacked. She has reportedly fled to Turkey, fearing for her safety. Meanwhile, the Israeli leader Cohen is facing backlash at home. He is accused of hampering Israel's diplomatic efforts by making this announcement. Here's a report.
It was supposed to be a step forward for Israel. Last week, Israel's foreign minister Eli Cohen met with his Libyan counterpart Najla Mangoush. This was in Rome in the presence of Italian foreign minister Antonio Tajani. Israel says these were official talks, the first of their kind between Israel and Libya. Israel says this was a step towards establishing official diplomatic ties with Libya. All this was announced by Israel's foreign ministry through social media and press releases. But it seems making all this public has backfired because it has caused a political storm in Libya. The news came out on Sunday, and that very day, protests erupted in Libya. People were seen waving the Palestinian flag and burning Israeli ones. The demonstrators damaged Libya's foreign ministry building. They attacked one of the prime minister's residences in Tripoli. The anger was palpable.
We support the Palestinian people totally. And we will not allow for Libya to occupy any country in the world, whether with Israel or others. We the Libyan people are a free people and we do not allow this at all. We support the Palestinian cause at all times. The Palestinian people are Arabs and we care about them greatly.
Libya's Prime Minister, Abdul Hamid al-Beiba, rushed to put out the fire. The metaphorical one anyway. He said he had no idea that such a meeting took place. He first suspended Foreign Minister Najla Mangoush, ordered an investigation into the meeting. Mangoush on her part denied that any official meeting took place. She said she ran into Israel's Cohen while meeting her Italian counterpart Tajani. Libya says it was an unofficial, unplanned chat. But these actions failed to calm tempers. So the government went a step further. They sacked the foreign minister. And she has fled the country, reportedly to Turkey, fearing for her life. The Libyan government's version of events contradicts what Israel said. Cohen said that the meeting was an official one. It lasted for about 2 hours. A host of topics, including Israeli assistance for humanitarian issues, agriculture and water management were discussed. Preserving the heritage of Libya's former Jewish community was also discussed. So, who do we believe? Libya's government is politically weak. It was installed after UN intervention, not elected. It's engaged in armed conflict with rebel groups. The country hasn't known peace since 2011. That's when longtime ruler Muammar Gaddafi was ousted and killed in a West-backed coup. After years of instability, the last thing the Libyan government needs is public discontent. What's happening in Israel? Foreign Minister Cohen has come under attack. The political opposition has called him an amateur. They said he should have known better than to publicize the meeting. That his gaffe risks Israel's long-term goal of normalizing ties with Arab countries, because normalization doesn't seem popular with the protesters in Libya.
Of course not. Honestly, we are against normalization. These Jews are our enemies. They displaced the Palestinian people and treat them with no mercy and are not giving them any part of their rights. We condemn this meeting with Israel, especially if normalization was planned. And if this meeting really happened and was not staged or something, then honestly, this is not something acceptable to Libyan people.
Since it was founded, Israel hasn't shared official ties with most of the Arab world. This is over the country's treatment of the Palestinian people. The Palestinians are an Arabic-speaking people. They are considered brethren by fellow Arab states. These are countries all over West Asia and Northern Africa. The Palestinian cause is an emotional issue in a lot of these nations. But over the years, some Arab nations have established ties with Israel. The US-backed Abraham Accords have allowed Israel to initiate diplomatic ties with 4 nations: the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco and Sudan. The US and other Israeli allies are trying to get more Arab nations to establish ties. The big prize is, of course, Saudi Arabia. But every Arab country counts, which is why Libya also matters. But the way things have turned out, it seems back to square one. Libya's government has burnt its fingers and is unlikely to try normalizing ties again anytime soon.
When will Nawaz Sharif return to Pakistan? It's a question that sums up their politics. Until last year, Sharif was enemy number 1. He was living in exile, he was convicted in multiple cases and his party was boxed into a corner. But all of that is in the past. Now Nawaz Sharif is Pakistan's favourite son. His return is all that anyone can talk about. In fact, his party is trending new hashtags on social media, like hashtag the man who built Pakistan and hashtag the lion returns. I know it's equal parts absurd and funny. Nawaz Sharif can thank the Pakistani army for his possible homecoming. But could there be a last-minute hurdle? I ask because we're getting mixed signals now. Nawaz Sharif's younger brother Shehbaz visited him in London. Both men later addressed the media. Shehbaz says his brother will return in October. Not just that, he also said Nawaz Sharif will face the law. Listen to this.
Nawaz Sharif will return to Pakistan in October and lead our party's election campaign. Nawaz Sharif will undoubtedly face the law after returning to Pakistan.
Ideally, that should settle it. Shehbaz Sharif is the younger brother and ex-Prime Minister. If he says October, it should be October. Well, not so fast. The Sharifs lead the PMLN political party. That's the Nawaz faction of Pakistan Muslim League. PML is Pakistan Muslim League and N stands for Nawaz. Their coalition partner is called the PPP, the Pakistan People's Party. Now, the PPP has a different take on Nawaz Sharif's return. Let me quote what their senior leader said. Nawaz Sharif has no plan to come to Pakistan right now. His health is not good. Shehbaz might have said what he did, but I'm saying he is not well. Even at the last moment, he can get unwell. Almost sounds like a threat. Does the PPP know something that the Sharifs do not? And even if they do, who do we believe? The younger brother or the coalition partner? And this question is a very important one. Shehbaz Sharif has made it clear that he will not be Prime Minister of Pakistan again. He wants Nawaz Sharif to take over. But for that, he must return first. And when he does, a mountain of cases await him. Nawaz Sharif was convicted of corruption in the year 2018. He was banned from holding public office. A lifetime ban. That's what he had. But in 2019, Nawaz Sharif travelled to London. He said he needed medical treatment. Apparently, it's a disease that targets convicted politicians. And since then, he's been there in London. Sharif's party members call it an exile, but Pakistan's courts disagree. In 2020, he was declared an absconder and a proclaimed offender. A legal jargon aside, this is a man in trouble. If he returns, the courts could crack down, maybe send him back to jail. His younger brother Shehbaz Sharif did try to prevent this scenario. He passed multiple laws to protect the older brother. One of them would have allowed Nawaz Sharif to appeal against his conviction. Just one problem though. The Supreme Court of Pakistan called this law unconstitutional. They struck it down. So Nawaz Sharif now faces a tough call. If he comes back and gets arrested, it would be a massive blow. He could join Imran Khan in jail. So the Sharifs are looking for a zero-risk situation. They need to be 100% sure that the courts will protect him. Will that happen in October? Well, Shehbaz Sharif was confident, and I'll tell you why he was so confident. Pakistan's current Chief Justice retires by mid-September. He's the same judge who criticized Imran Khan's conviction. He said the trial was defective. And his successor is this man, Justice Qazi Faiz Issa. Many call him an independent-minded judge, but the Sharifs will be thrilled by his elevation. You see, Justice Issa has bad blood with Imran Khan. His government accused this judge of corruption, even launched inquiries against him. But Shehbaz Sharif quashed all of these cases. He said the charges were flimsy and baseless. Maybe that's why Shehbaz Sharif mentioned October. There will be a new Chief Justice by then. Also, the election dates could be officially announced. So more clarity and less risk. For Imran Khan, it's the opposite. All his allies are retiring soon. President Arif Alvi's term is supposed to end in September. There is no word on extending it. The Chief Justice will also retire next month. So time is of the essence. Imran Khan did have some small victories this week. A sedition case against him was quashed by the Balochistan High Court. A murder charge against him was also dropped. But the big case is the Tosha Khana case, the one involving state gifts. The Islamabad High Court has finished hearing the case. The verdict will be out tomorrow. If the conviction is reversed, it would be a big win for Imran Khan. It could also pour water on the Sharif homecoming party. So tomorrow promises to be a big day in Pakistan. Our next story comes from the world of sports. Only a few days ago, young crops like Pragnananda kept the Indian flag flying high at the Chess World Cup in Baku. Now the golden boy of Indian athletics has scripted history. Yet again, Niraj Chopra has clinched the gold medal. This was in the men's javelin throw event at the World Athletics Championships in Budapest. He is the first Indian to win a gold at the prestigious championship. And pardon the analogy, but it's almost as if Chopra is playing Pokemon with medals. This newly crowned champion has won every major title in his sport, including gold at the Olympics, Asian Games and Commonwealth Games. With this, he is on track to become one of India's greatest sporting icons. So what is Niraj Chopra's story? Here's a report.
If you're an Indian, there's a high chance that you remember this moment. Maybe you even remember yourself glued to a TV screen as Niraj Chopra threw a javelin with fierce might, With this shot, he had won gold at the Tokyo Olympics 2020 and scripted history. He became only the second Indian to win an individual Olympic gold. The first was Abhinav Bindra in 2008. He won an Olympic gold in shooting, following which India didn't see an Olympic gold for over a decade, till Chopra walked in, stunning the world. And that was no flash in the pan. He has been unstoppable since. The 25-year-old has won every major title in the sport, including gold at the 2016 World Junior Championships, gold at the 2016 South Asian Games, gold at the 2017 Asian Championships, gold at the 2018 Commonwealth Games, gold at the 2018 Asian Games, gold at the 2020 Tokyo Olympics, the 2022 Diamond League Trophy, and now the World Championships in Hungary. Chopra has etched his name in history again. He has become the first ever Indian to win a gold at the World Athletics Championships. During his second attempt, he recorded an incredible 88.17 meters. And just as he threw the javelin, he knew that he'd nailed it. He instantly raised his arms to celebrate his win.
इंडिया में बहुत ज़्यादा पोटेंशियल दिख रही है अभी और एक अच्छा लगता है कि लोग एथलेटिक्स को फॉलो कर रहे हैं और एथलेटिक्स स्पोर्ट को इतना लोग देख रहे थे आज पर मैं खुद ये बात नहीं बोलना चाहूंगा मैं अभी और ज़्यादा और काफी कुछ करना है तो उस पे फोकस करेंगे अभी
His success is a reward for his sheer perseverance. Chopra hails from a village in India's Haryana. Fun fact, he took up javelin at his father's insistence. And the primary motivation was not love for the sport, but to lose weight. Niraj Chopra, as a kid, had a weakness for junk food. As an 11-year-old, he weighed 90 kgs. 90 is still a magic number, but now it's the distance that he's targeting.
एक कोई दिन पता नहीं वो किस दिन आने वाला है क्योंकि 90 मीटर इतनी उसके क्लोज काफी थ्रो लगा चुका हूं लेकिन आएगा वो दिन कभी ना कभी मैं उस चीज का कोई प्रेशर नहीं लूंगा बीच में मैंने थोड़ा सोचा था कि 90 मीटर थ्रो करना है लेकिन सबसे मेन मुझे लगता है कि थ्रो कई बार थ्रो से ज्यादा मेडल होता है.
So what sets Niraj Chopra apart? Now, javelin is a physical sport. But like any great athlete, Chopra knows that his mind plays a crucial role too. He's known to work on his mental strength, and that helps him to be consistent. His career is laden with records. He collects medals like he's playing a game of Pokemon. He has logged a distance of over 88 meters at least 10 times, along with a throw of over 85 meters 26 times, and over 82 meters 37 times. Niraj Chopra is now fondly called the golden boy of Indian athletics. And why wouldn't he be? Chopra has become an inspiration for young athletes in India. He has done what no one else could. And he's just 25 years old. The newly crowned champion says throwers don't have a finish line. We could say the same about his talent as well.
And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. Today, that image is of the British airspace. A technical issue affected the UK's air traffic control. As a result, there was chaos. Hundreds of flights to and from the country were grounded. Thousands of passengers were stuck at airports. Many of them still are, in fact. The issue had to deal with flight plans. They give air traffic control important information like where is the aircraft coming from, where is it heading to, and at what time. Usually, this information is fed automatically into the system, but for a brief time, it had to be done manually. Authorities have not figured out what caused the snag, but the good news is it has been resolved. The US had a similar experience in January. Hundreds of planes were grounded after the Federal Aviation Authority reported a snag. Needless to say, it's a terrible experience for passengers. Their bookings, their travel plans, all of it would have gone for a toss. And over to some striking visuals now. First from Romania. Two massive explosions happened at a fueling station. At least one person has been killed and more than 26 firefighters have been injured. Meanwhile, the Indian Space Research Organisation has released new images sent by the Pragyan rover. It came across a crater on the moon's surface. And SpaceX sent a rocket to the International Space Station. It had 4 astronauts on board who who have now reached space. We'll show you how the launch went and how the astronauts greeted each other. Finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1963, Martin Luther King Jr. gave his iconic speech, "I Have a Dream." He was one of the most prominent leaders of the civil rights movement in the United States. In the speech, Martin Luther King Jr. said he imagined a future without racism. We're leaving you with that. Thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
I am happy to join with you today.
The International Space. So these are our 4 crew members. You can only see them. Roscosmos, his first time on board the International Space Station as well. And with that, crew...